All right, hello and welcome everybody to our continued webinar series. Today we're going to be talking about the new features in FarmQA. So we hope to just get you up to speed with some visualizations on the content we've been building into our platform over the last few months. This is hopefully accompanying our newsletter, which touched on a couple of those new items as well. But with that, I will jump in as we have a lot to cover. New features that I'll be talking about today, we did add functionality to support insect traps within FarmQA. And with that, we built it in a way that we can handle other generic waypoints and marking GPS pins as well. We added a generic field note capability where a user can enter in higher level notes at a season level or across all seasons that are specific to a field. We hit on batch scouting, which is a way to more efficiently check a lot of fields and create reports. We'll also talk about how we can use our calculated plant population question that is baked into our templates. We did officially release our analytics dashboard, which you can see on that screenshot on the right-hand side, which we're excited about. And then we have a few others we'll hit on, like legal descriptions, some disclaimers that we can put in our recommendations now, along with a bulk image processing. So with that said, I'm going to jump into a live demo and start to walk through some of these functions within the product. So with that, I'm going to jump over to Controller, which is our web platform. And with that, we will start on what we call geomarkers, and this is the kind of broader feature which houses the insect traps that I mentioned before. And so basically what this function is the ability to define locations where you might be collecting insect trap information. So you can see on my map on the left-hand side how I've turned on insect traps as a layer. And then from the map itself, as I zoom in, I can see trap locations. The real value of this is we'll walk through how you can set up the traps, enter the data, but then the analytics behind that of viewing trends over time, which that is really where the value comes in a system or a setup like this. And so with that said, we'll get into creating a trap, scouting it, and then viewing the data. So we have the ability within our platform where you can use our predefined markers. And so what I've done here is I've gone into settings on the left-hand side, and then there's a section called markers. Within here, you can see our predefined marker types of insect traps, scouting locations, and soil samples. You guys can use those out of the box. If you want to customize and add new marker types, you can do that with the plus button on the bottom left. And so this would be setting up things if you want to track where you had tile inlets in a field. You can define that, and you could say, as a description, you could say user defined. And then within the marker type, if we expand this out, you can see how you can select. This is more or less the pin icon that's going to accompany that marker. In this case, the tile lines don't fit one of those pre-built options, so we'll use a custom location type. And then we will save that, and then that now becomes a type of marker that we can define. So jumping over to the mobile application, so if we now jump into an account that has those marker types, and so what I'll do here is I'm going to jump into scouting application, and what I'll do here is if I zoom into a field, and let's say this field 117, I wanted to define some of this information that I did create previously on the marker page. What I can do is I can click somewhere in the field with the tap of my finger, or the blue plus button in the bottom left will drop a GPS pin where your phone is. And so what that'll do is bring up an action pane on the bottom. And for this particular function, we're going to click the drop pin at location, which then brings up the marker types that we then defined. And in this case, I'm going to drop an insect trap, and let's say this is for head moth. And so we can give that a pin name. We can give it a pin description if you wanted to say, or let's just do this a different way, where we say this is trap 1, and then description might be for head moth. And with that, we'll save that marker type, and you can see how that then displays on the map. And I could continue on this way to say trap number 2, description head moth, and then you can see how I could build out a map with those pins. Now, another key component here is that let's say I add a second type here, and maybe this is a scouting pin, and we'll say that this is wild oats. And so maybe you want to mark where your wild oats are so you can return and maybe spot spray or spot check throughout the season where those wild oats are to make sure that you have indeed sprayed for them. So let's just say this is wild oats, and you can see how you can use the same pin name if I would like to generate a map within that field with GPS specific pins that are marked out. And now what you can do within the interface of the mobile application is we can swipe up from the bottom of the field details, and then I can toggle between those map types. So if I wanted to see my insect traps versus my scouting locations versus my, here I got soil sample locations, you can see those and toggle through them. Now, the next component of this is, let's say this is a setup I've already created previously for doing counts within my sugar beet fields. So I'll turn on, in this case, I have 3 traps, but now I want to actually record information on a particular trap. So I could click on trap 1 in this case, and within the action pane at the bottom, we're going to add an observation, which brings us into the scouting template associated to that pin. So now what we can do is I want to track root maggot within these sugar beets. And so what I'll do is I can simply use the scouting form to fill in a value at that pin location. If I want to assess the additional pins or traps, I should say, I can click through those and continue to fill out that root maggot question. And then you'll see on the web view how that data can be viewed across the traps. And so I'll fill out the 3rd trap. And again, I'm going to put in maybe a slightly higher value in this case. And now what we can do is we can submit that entire observation period. And this will generate both an individual scouting report, which can be viewed immediately on the scouting application under your past reports. Or we can come over to the web view. And I'll start by pulling up that individual scouting report, where we can simply see the values associated back to those pins with the GPS locations on the mini map, along with the values here. But now within this view, we can see that if I view that same data set, but from the map view. So we'll go into my field, and in this case, it's called insect traps down here. And with the insect trap layer turned on from the map view, if I sync my data and then click on an individual pin, you can see that the trap name is displayed, but then clicking on the field itself on the left-hand side, we can see that with the traps, we track metrics, which then allows us to see the trends over time for that field across those traps. And so in this case, the first line that you're seeing here is the average across all 3 of my inputs per week. But then if I view this by pin, it's then going to disperse that data, and you can see individual trap results on this map and use the mouse itself to see the values by date. So that's the concept of our traps, the geomarkers. And like I said, you can customize your own types to drop anything from tile lines. You can set up new questions specifically for wild oats and use this for marking information, sharing it with the grower, sharing it with colleagues, and then they can pull it up on the mobile app and use it for navigation or data collection purposes. So with that, we'll move on to our next topic of field notes. And so with that, we have the ability to track higher level notes on a field. So clearly we have a scouting application, but in addition to that, if there's some information that pertains to the field that might be more than just a point in time observation, so something like we have requests to track gate codes, to track, let's say in the southeast corner, you frequently have disease issues. That's something that might work well as a field level note. And so from the particular interface that I'm showing here, if we click on the ... icon, if you click on the notes icon on the bottom right, this will bring up the pane where we can actually enter a note. Now, as you can see on the bottom right, we've got the ability to define a note for an individual growing season or an all season note. So in my case, I'll do an all season note, and in this case, it's essentially a large text box where you can put in something like the gate code is 1234, and that might be something that is valuable to a team of scouts who's out checking fields and needs to pull up that information quickly. But then you could also do a more specific field note and say that this was 2021 was extremely dry. extremely dry, poor yields throughout. And then if you submit that, that note is then available to your full team and also to growers if they have access as well. And those notes will always be available by clicking on that icon in the bottom right of your mobile application to pull those up for viewing, or you can click the plus button to edit or add new notes. In addition to that, those notes are available on the web and can be added from the web. So if, for example, if we wanted to look at, I've got a field over here that's got a few notes, and you can see that that number 3 icon again notates that there is content within the note section. And if I click on that, I see my actual notes by season and all season notes as well. And then we can add to this for the webinar. So if I do that, that will then be a note that gets added in and is visible to the team. So it really is a living, breathing notepad that can be shared by a team and referenced by any users within the system. Okay, the next topic would be batch scouting. And so this is a concept of trying to be more efficient while you scout. So the scenario I will use is we're in the field and we checked a series of, well, we'll say soybean fields, and they were all very similar, if not identical, in what they were growth stage and what they were seeing in the field as far as weeds, insects, disease pressure. And so I may want to enter that as a batch. The way I go about doing that is from the main map view. You can see that the plus button on the bottom right has 4 options within it. And if I click on New Batch Scouting Report, which is the top option, this now enters me into the batch scouting mode. And so from this view, if I click on Choose Fields, I have the option where I can select multiple fields from the map view, which is searchable. So I could say soybeans, and let's say these fields are all going to get scouted the same. So I could multi-select, or what I can do is select fields from the list view as well. Once I click done, those fields have been added to the batch. I can choose what template I want to use. The default template is assigned to the fields, and so that can be used. But if you want to override, you could select from a drop-down list. Now I can start scouting. And what I'll do in this scenario is I will add a summary note. So I'll say overall field looks good. Let's see, yield target on track. And then what I can do from here, for example, I'm going to add in a general note for growth stage, and we'll just say that this is all at post-emergence. Okay, so I will submit that, and we will see that the process of submission will split out and generate a report per field selected. So if I scroll down to my past report section on the mobile application, you can see that I have now generated reports for all the fields that I had selected. And the same thing would go for the web view. And so if I click on this, I see just that summary text on each field. It says overall field looks good with that growth stage defined. But now a unique thing we can do to this is, let's say I had selected 5 fields as part of that batch. Perhaps 2 of those fields also had insect issues that you want to document. What you can do within FarmQA is, if you have the ability to auto-merge scouting reports turned on, then you could then submit a second batch for just 2 of the 5 fields with the insect data, and it will merge into those reports. And so double checking that the merge is on within the settings tab, organization, you can see that I do have merge turned on for a 24-hour period. And so now what I can do within the scouting app is I will return to the batch scouting interface. And this time I'm going to select just 2 of the soybean fields on the Minnesota side of my operation. We'll do the top 2. And now as I enter into the same scouting template, and this time I'm going to say that we had aphid pressure, and maybe also for the sake of the template, we'll say I also had curly dock issues that were severe. If I now submit this, that auto merge is going to push those 2 changes that were specific to just the 2 top fields that I picked into my scouting reports. And so now if I view, I have some of these reports that look the same, but some of them that now contain that weed observation of curly dock that's severe and the high aphid pressure as well. So that is something that you can keep in mind for doing batch scouting. to say a lot of the fields might have a lot of similar characteristics, but then a few of them have a unique issue or detail that you want to document. You can do that through a single batch or then merging multiple batches together to then efficiently create reports. And then as a refresher, you can multi-select from either the web or the mobile application to push those out into a single PDF for a grower or producer to see those all grouped together. Moving on, we added in the functionality to automatically do a plant population assessment for you based on a series of inputs. And so to talk through that, you will first start out by looking at the template. And so within the scouting tab, if I click on my templates, this is where we'll be able to see the question types that we have defined for our plant populations. If I jump into any given template, so we'll just click on a serial template, but in my case, for the sake of example, I'm going to create a new section called plant populations. And now if I add a new question, the new type that we have defined is the plant population, and you can see how you can set that up as either imperial or metric from the screen. If I set it up as a plant population as imperial, we can now give this question a name on the right-hand side. And let's say that this is, we'll just call this plant population. And within here, let's say I'm going to rename this template to a corn template example. And then within this, we're going to do, there's a series of three sub questions that get populated. But a few things that you can do within this is that for the plant count, for example, we could set a logical range. So maybe 1 through 40 plants, or let's say 10 through 40 plants. And then you can allow multiple answers, for example. And then within that, let's say you always want to assess maybe 3 different 17.5-foot rows. So you can do that here with the setting up initial answers of 3. Then for row spacing, we're going to say for default, we can set up the row spacing, maybe 30 inches. And then within that, again, you could set a range if you wanted. And then row length as well. Let's say we commonly do our assessments on 17.5-foot rows or row lengths. Let's see here. I want to set up the default value of 17.5-foot rows. And so that's where you can do that here. If you set 1 decimal, then you could type in 17.5 and save this. And then when we get into scouting, you can see that, let's say I come into my scouting application, I'm going to click on this field 117 again. I'm going to enter the add observation mode, but this time I'm going to click on plant population. And this is a template where I've got the population question that I just set up. But as you can see, I have 3 inputs defined. And so in this case, I could say I did a count of 27 plants in a 17.5-foot row. Maybe you did a 31 and let's just say a 20. Then the row spacing is pre-populated because we set that up as a default. And the same with row length, so you don't have to touch those. But if you did enter a field that had a different row spacing, you could adjust that, and the calculation would do that accordingly. So now we can back out, and we will automatically show you the plant population based on that assessment. Another thing to note with these types of questions is that if you do multiple assessments, let's say you go to the southwest corner, add another observation, and we're going to enter populations again here, and we're just going to say that this was lower. And now if I submit this, you'll see that on the final scouting report, we have a breakdown of the different regions. So the populations here are going to be calculated for each of my pins, along with that field average. And so this is hopefully just allowing a scout, an agronomist to key in the values and rely on FarmQA to crunch the numbers behind those population assessments. Another thing to keep in mind is that you can bring up plant population maps in this process. So let's say you wanted to view a map, in this case is a zone map, but a better example would be an actual planting file. You could do your assessments based on an overlay like this within the field by just clicking and adding your observation, and you'd see that relative to those zones or to the population areas. While we're on this topic, note that with this population function, we did add in a few other generic functions that are available for any numeric assessment. So a good example of this would be if I come into, let's say, my seed depth question, what I wanted to point out here is that if you turn on the ability to scout and enter multiple answers per question, you can then define min, max, and average as the output. And so, for example, if I do that and I'm going to save this question, then I'm going to go back in and scout a field and show you for that particular seed depth question how you can enter information and then what the output's going to look like based on those selected settings. So let's say I go into, actually I gotta go to my potato field and I'm going to scout. And this time I'm going to go into the seed depth question. And I've set up a series of different inputs here. And what we can do within this is we can answer the questions. And then once I submit this, or I could even add more if I wanted, but then once I submit this, and I'll show you the output, because I had selected on my template that I wanted to see the min, max, and the average, you can see that that is the display. So the minimum value entered was 1, average was 2.5, the max was 4. And so those display options for any repeater numerics are now available. And keep in mind that you could pick and choose. For example, if you just wanted to show the min and the max and you didn't want the average, you could multi-select to show that as the output. Okay, so continuing on, we did add in an analytics dashboard. So if you are upgraded to analytics, you'd be able to see this analytics tab. And traditionally, what you'd have access to would be the report view, like you're seeing here, to see data across time and across fields. And then you would have the functionality to create different views within our Metric Explorer. But our vision is to allow an agronomist, maybe a user of our system, to create particular views, but then save those in as dashboards that might be more user-friendly or easier to consume as a producer. And so the dashboard tab that you're seeing here is the function I'm referring to. And what this allows you to do is you can set up different dashboard types. For example, I have one for my soil data, one for weed information. But what we'll do in this particular process, if we want to create an entirely new dashboard, we'll just call this weather 1.0. And then within here on the top right, I've got the ability to add panes. And so if I click on this button, we now get a drop-down list of those pre-created views that I've made. And I can then start to add in anything that I've built that might be relative to this kind of the weather dashboard that I'm building out. So I've got things like a GDU map and GDUs over time. I also have some precipitation data, either by farm or by field as well. And so now I built out this particular summary or dashboard, I should say. Note that I can also rearrange. So once you get these panels created, you could then adjust their size and save that. That is in a dashboard that's available to other users and the producer as well. We've got a few other features that I'll try to hit on in the last few minutes here. One would be the ability to define legal descriptions with fields. And so what this allows you to do is, for example, if you are going to create a new field within FarmQA, either from the mobile app or the web, let's say we define the area of the field. On the left-hand side, you can see I have a field name. Let's just call this home quarter. But now the legal description, you can key this in. So you can do a lookup within our system, which tries to define the legal description. Or if you want the layout to be different, you could do something like Reed County, and this is section 18, and maybe you want it to be this, that's the northwest quarter, and we'll assign that to sugar beets. So now if we view that field, click on it, we see that in bold letters here we get the field name, but the eye icon is going to display that legal description for us. And so that's being tracked and it's visible on the map view. It's also visible on the list view. So if you want to search this, for example, if you want to say, show me any fields in, Berlin Township, oops, the pre-populated, let's just say the Berlin Township, and then we filter, that will then break down our view to just show those fields. And so that's filterable. And then in addition to that, that is also available on the list view as well, or sorry, from the mobile app, where if you click on a field, you get that same eye icon at the top of your screen. And if you click on that, it's going to provide that legal description and some other basic information about that field. We've added in legal descriptions for recommendations. So under the advice tab, if you look at a given recommendation in our system, you can see that this will be an example without a legal description, so there's nothing kind of tagged at the bottom. So what you can do to add a legal description is click on the settings, go into your organization tab, and then as we scroll down, you can see within the advice section, you could say include notes on all recommendations. And then within this view, you could say, please review all product labels before spraying. And then there are abilities in here if you want to italicize or bold particular things, you can do that. And then this function allows, or will put that statement on any recommendation that I then write. So let's say I do a recommendation on a series of cornfields, and I add that. You'll then see within my recommendation pane, here we go. You'll then have that, please review all product labels before spraying, and that will move all the way through to the PDF as well and be visible to the producer that way. So here's a PDF of that, and then you can see that text at the bottom. Another thing to note from the mobile application as well that we've added in is that we had a lot of requests for people that were looking for additional filters. And so this would be from things like the list view, where by default you could sort this by crop and by distance to you. But we've also added in the ability to sort this by plant date, scouted date, and recommendation date. So for example, if you want to check cornfields, but you're going to do that in order of when they were planted, you could then search corn, and then this will display on the right-hand side when they're planted, with the filter being the oldest to the newest, and then that would allow you to scout or click in to scout from that view. So with that, I've got one additional feature that we're going to close on, and this is the ability to bulk process imagery. So we have a direct integration to Planet to bring in imagery like NDVI, ortho imagery, but if you have your own source of imagery, let's say drone images, you go through something like Sentinel Hub, then that can be a free source where you bring imagery in through our map layer functionality. But what's new is that you can then bulk clip large TIFF files down to our field boundaries, and we'll do the kind of the heavy lifting of doing that. So the scenario I will talk through here is within Sentinel Hub. We have an area defined on this map view. What I've done here within the Sentinel Hub platform is that you can then export this NDVI image, or you could go over to True Color and export that out as a TIFF or a GeoTIFF file. And a key thing to note there is we accept 8-band or 16-band TIFF files. But then what you can do within our platform is that if you come into the Settings tab, and this time we're going to click on the Map Layer section, and what I'm going to do is I've got a Sentinel NDVI set up here as far as an output. But just to talk through the full process, you could also set up a new layer, and we'll call this Sentinel Ortho Imagery. And now if we select a layer type, we want this to be time-based, given the fact that we will have images per week, per day, however frequent you would have those images. But now if that is set up, you're going to see some options across the top that are new. The first one, or the main one that I want to talk through, is the create images from TIFF. And so what this allows us to do is if I click on that option, and let's say I have downloaded a TIFF file, so you can see I've got an NDVI TIFF and just a True Color TIFF as well. If I bring in, actually first I'm going to show you how you can set the date. So if you know that this image, in my case, you can see in the download folder, this is from the 6th of June. I can then send that as the import date. I can drop in that ortho file, that large TIFF, and then you can see on the top right, we accepted that file and we are pending as far as the status. And so what FarmQA is doing with this is that we're going through and clipping out that image per field boundary. And then while that's happening, also you can also do that same thing, but on, let's say, an NDVI layer. And so this is the process. If you export out a series of images from, let's say, Sentinel Hub, you could then drop them into the respective map layers, and we will upload those and allow you to then display those clipped to the boundary on the map view. And so, for example, if I click into a field, this may not be done processing yet, but if I then turn on, let's say, my Sentinel NDVI, you could then see, there you go, that's the June 6th image that would be clipped to our field shape itself. So that's something that is available in our app and WebView if you want to have your own source of imagery, drone imagery, larger process TIFF files. So with that, that was a lot to cover, and so I think I want to leave it at that for today. And just note that if we did go through something fairly fast, please feel free to refer to our YouTube video where you can rewatch segments. You can pause it to see exactly where I clicked. We are going to continue our webinar series, and so please stay tuned with us. At this time, I would take any questions through the chat portal within Teams. And then for reference, while you are waiting for questions to come through, note that you can reach us directly at farmqa.com/support, or please view our blogs for other additional information on some of these new features that we have released. So with that, we will adjourn the webinar, but please reach out with any questions, and we would love to hear from you. Thank you.